Since the release of A Grand Day Out in 1989, Aardman Animations have given us some of the best animated films to come out of the UK, as well as that one about the football, I guess. The distinctive visual style and tone brought into the company by Nick Park for the first Wallace and Gromit film have become synonymous with Aardman as a whole, and whilst the company's output has always been varied, Aardman as we know it today feels like it begins in 1989. Except the company was founded in 1972, 17 years before the release of A Grand Day Out. What were they doing before then? And yes, before you head to the comments, I know that one of the answers is really obvious, just hang fire, give me a few minutes, we'll get to him. Aardman's pre-1989 filmography is interesting, with hints of what was to come, as well as stuff you would never expect from them. Most of them were released in 2000 on the Aardman Classics DVD, with the remainder being available on the net. This DVD is a quarter century old. So that's what we're doing today, a quick fire look through Aardman's short films pre-Wallace and Gromit. Let's get started. So right off the bat, I will clarify that we're only looking at the films and shows that were produced or animated solely by Aardman, hence why we're starting in 1979. As mentioned before, Aardman had already been going for 7 years by this point, formed by David Sproxton and Peter Lord in 1972. In that time they had been producing segments for shows like Vision On and Take Heart, don't worry, we are getting there, but these were all small segments of other shows. Likewise, we're not looking at the company's advertising animations, we would be here all day. The first thing we're looking at is
animated conversations,
which that actually sums up quite nicely a lot of what they were doing. Animated Conversations was an anthology of short animated films set to audio captured from the real world as opposed to written dialogue. The series was produced by BBC Bristol, and as Aardman were based in Bristol thanks to Vision On and Take Heart, they were asked to contribute 2 5-minute films, Confessions of a Foyer Girl and Down and Out. Let's start with Confessions of a Foyer Girl, which follows the disinterested conversation of 2 people idly chatting at work to pass the day away. We're going to encounter real audio several times in this video, and it gives a unique feel to these films. In the Ardoc series on the Aardman YouTube channel, which I highly recommend you check out by the way, David Sproxton talks about how they would search through hours of audio just to find the gems that they could animate. But for this film, if these are the gems of the conversation, I can only imagine what the rest of the conversation went like. Unlike later films, there's little narrative through line in the sections of conversation used. The main character talks through staying up late to have fun, the sexuality of a friend, and a horrific event reported in the paper with the same tired tone.
Wasn't that awful, Jane?
There is an attempt to juxtapose her speech with live action footage for humorous effect, including this shot, which I believe is a Whistle of England hour, one of the Vale of Rado engines at least, but it doesn't quite gel. The animation is rougher here, including what feels like a desynced section of dialogue at the end.
If my hair is not done, I cannot enjoy myself.
There are a few moments in here I like, the British Board of Fish Fingers amuses me, but overall this one is a miss. Much better is the other short, Down and Out. Set to a confused conversation between a pensioner and Salvation Army staff, the animation is cleaner and clearer. Gone is the chaotic energy of Confessions, with the animation focusing much more on the 3 key characters. There's none of the warm, cosy, humorous tone Aardman would later become famous for. Everything here is played straight, focusing the audience on the plight of the 3 individuals involved. The conversation chosen is engaging, if uncomfortable, and self-contained, giving a clear narrative for an audience to follow that wouldn't have been apparent to those actually having the conversation. The film makes good and interesting choices like cutting to the man at the desk reacting, or having the pensioner briefly walk away or pause at the door. These choices help shape how we react to the scene. Spoiler alert, we're going to see a lot more of these kind of films as we go on, and Down and Out is the template that most of the rest will follow. Right, now you can head to the comments. The Amazing Adventures of Morph was Morph's first TV show of his own, but it wasn't his first appearance. The character had been created by Aardman for short segments on Hart's art show for children, Take Heart. The connection with Tony Hart is maintained here, with him acting as narrator and occasionally getting involved in the action. Morph was well known enough by this point that only a year later he received his own Blue Peter badge. Incidentally, it was Tony Hart who actually designed the original Blue Peter badge. The Amazing Adventures of Morph follows in the same general tone as the Take Heart segments, albeit with less focus on mucking about with art supplies, and more on slapstick and interacting with the expanded cast of characters. The Morph shows are interesting from an animation viewpoint in that they contain Aardman's early attempts at pixelation. Not this kind of pixelation. In animation terms, it's the use of a human being in stop-motion animation. Aardman would go on to experiment with this a bit more in the future, including the series Angry Kid, as well as something else that's coming up later. Aardman's Morph output is probably the stuff from this era that most closely resembles their later output, which, along with nostalgia, is probably why Morph is still publicly associated with the company today. There's some fun visuals here, such as Morph living in a double-decker boot in one episode, or entering a black and white film, but by this point Aardman had been making Morph shorts for a while, and this is more of the same. Representatives from Channel 4 had expressed interest in Aardman's films for animated conversations and requested 10 similar 5-minute shorts for themselves. The small studio was unable to produce all 10 films at once, so 5 were made now with another 5 due later on down the line. Thus we arrive at Conversation Pieces, a spiritual successor to both Confessions of a Foyer Girl and Down and Out. On Probation immediately shows which of the 2 prior films have influenced the direction of the new bunch, following someone staying in an approved premise seeking permission to visit family in front of his probationary board. The 2 parties struggle to communicate, with the board in particular seeming to deliberate on the point with excessive detail for the matter in hand, at least that's how it looks to an outsider. The continued conversation under the credits even asks,
Mr. Chairman, can you try and get through the points a little bit quicker?
The visual style remains similar, but there's more characters in play since last time, showing the slightly expanded scope compared to what came before. Likewise, Sales Pitch features a conversation where people struggle to communicate, in this case a travelling salesman. The salesman continues to peddle his trade even as the couple he speaks to go off topic and express their disinterest. The salesman manages to remain chipper and polite, with the exception of one moment emphasised with a camera move.
I just think how many youngish young people will be more interested in that.
Do you know what the young people say? Pardon?
He returns to his normal self quickly after, but that moment, along with the shot at the end, hints how much the job may be wearing him down, which then, thanks to his persistence, becomes the couple's problem. In contrast to Down and Out, the Conversation Pieces films are willing to implement comedy while retaining a serious tone. Sales Pitch does this with a woman leaning out the window silently listening to the conversation, and the couple's dog, whilst Palmy Days uses a similar silent character reacting to his friend's travel reminiscences and other distractions. Early Bird puts comedy front and centre. Instead of animating a conversation per se, the short animates a section of radio broadcast, with a lot of visual gags, a lot of them nonsensical. A fair few of these happen as different segments of the show play without the presenter speaking. This, quite handily for the animators, along with the reaction shots of silent characters, reduces the amount of animation that needs to occur synced to sound. Early Bird is probably the best of this second bunch, as it pushes what can be achieved in the format of animating reality. Closing out the second set of films is Late Edition, following a newsroom of a local publication as they arrange their next issue. Rather than a discrete conversation, it cherry-picks moments from throughout a day to show the team's progress, or lack thereof. Unlike Early Bird, Late Edition lacks the distinct visual flair that the former film possesses, and it's not entirely clear how much the team have got done by day's end. The larger cast don't have the distinct voices heard in Sales Pitch, and a few voices can be heard at moments that don't have characters assigned. Although the cast is much larger than last time, there's clearly a practical limit to how much they want to show on screen. Overall, Conversation Pieces is an improvement on the animated Conversations films. Technically they're a step up, and by and large the team at Aardman have got smarter about what conversations would make a good animated film. They still had 5 films to deliver, but right now they had a couple of different projects on their plate. Peter Gabriel wanted the lead single for his upcoming album So to have a distinct and memorable video that would stand up to repeat viewings. Teaming up with the brothers Quay and Aardman, they produced the video to Sledgehammer. The song's innuendo-driven nature gave great opportunity for the animators to create both more literal and more surreal imagery based upon the lyrics. Incorporating Gabriel into the animation made this Aardman's most intensive use of pixelation to that point, transitioning to a focus on Aardman's more traditional claymation style towards the instrumental section. The video was shot over 6 days and, along with the next film we'll discuss, was one of the first things that Nick Park worked on at Aardman after joining them full time. He worked on the sections with the bumper cars and the chickens, fittingly enough. The end result is impressive even today. Whilst Aardman's claymation and pixelation have both gotten smoother since, nothing else they've made has been quite as bonkers as this. Standing in contrast to this is Aardman's other big project of 1986. Sweet Disaster is a series of short animated films themed around the concept of the Cold War descending into full-on nuclear conflict, each film taking a different approach to convey the existential horror of the situation. Aardman were asked to provide a film, and so they presented Babylon. This is the longest of the films we're talking about in this video, at 13 minutes long. The film is technically impressive, featuring some really dynamic lighting choices and an expansive cast with several memorable characters like the waiter, or the speaker, or this Dr. Strangelove style fella. Most striking of all is this particular character, looking like a cross between Kingpin and the Hood. He towers over and dominates the other characters, all the while accompanied by this strange inhuman growl. He generates a lot of unease. Helping this is the soundscape. As it's revealed what everyone's doing here, the words peace and profit repeat throughout the film, fading in and out at different points to highlight certain words or actions. Subtlety is not one of this film's strong points, nor should it be as an anti-war film. The voices are a clear indicator to the audience what the creator wants them to take away from the experience. Like and subscribe. Spoilers ahead for anyone interested in checking this out. As the speaker, the president of this group, begins his rant, mildly pitch modulated to give it an inhuman quality, he uses fear, scapegoating and buzzwords to enable his trade, whilst positioning his clients as functional aristocracy over the masses. As he speaks, the sinister man silently enacts deals to gain more power, visualized by him growing in size. The speaker's words almost don't matter compared to the real business being undertaken. Finally, once the sinister man has exploited everyone, he explodes with tides of blood, smiling. The speaker even gets caught up in it with a brief horrified expression, as he realizes despite his elevated position, the ensuing destruction he wanted will include even him. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to see what the directors are trying to say here. The only survivors are the waiter, who has done nothing to prevent the sinister man, and the man in the wheelchair, who seems to be important enough, or at least tolerated enough, that he can barge through a queue of these powerful people with no repercussions. The first direct action the waiter takes afterwards is to disable the other man's wheelchair. Assuming the wheelchair is a shout out to Dr. Strangelove imagery, it's a nice reminder that those on the bottom can take action to halt those in power to prevent further evil. Unless the wheelchair is just a coincidence, in which case, what the hell, man? I know we've spent longer on Babylon than we have anything else, but A, it's longer than anything else here, and B, it has the most potent mood and imagery of any of the shorts that we're going to discuss today, bar maybe one. Babylon demonstrates a level of darkness that Aardman wouldn't really touch in their main product again. I can't imagine them making or being asked to make anything like this again, so I'm glad that this still exists and is still available. The success of the Sledgehammer music video gained Aardman attention from advertisers who wanted them to produce promos in their distinct style. As mentioned at the top of the video, we won't be looking at those, but we will be looking at two promos of a sort from this year, music videos. 1987 saw two older songs gain Aardman animated music videos to enable visual promotion on music programs. It's worth remembering that the music video as we generally understand it was only a little over 10 years old at that point, with Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody being the point where most new releases would have a specifically produced video by the artist or label to act as the single visual representation of that song. The first to discuss is Robert Parker's Barefootin', an R&B song from 1966. It's a nice enough tune, one of those about a dance like The Twist or The Locomotion. According to David Sproxton on our docs, these older R&B songs tended to hang around the bottom of the top 100. The video was an attempt to push it up a little bit higher. Its peak position in 1987 was 90, so make of that what you will. And the video itself is fine? Maybe it's just coming off Sweet Disaster, but this feels a much more rushed effort. The animation and camera don't feel as smooth as we've become accustomed to. The visuals are fun to a degree, but they feel like a very literal interpretation of the lyrics, which doesn't work as well here as it did with Sledgehammer. The image of this alien chap playing his nose like a guitar gets a laugh though. Much better is the video for Nina Simone's My Baby Just Cares For Me. In this case, the song had recently become popular again as part of a Chanel commercial, and thus the video was made to capitalise on it. This is much better than the previous effort, there's much more care taken here. First off, there's actually a visual narrative that ties into the lyrics without directly copying them, for the best, seeing as the song has only one verse repeated twice with only minor variations. Following this cat, yeah, do you get it? Attending the singer's show and trying to get back in after being ejected. There's a classic black and white feel here, lots of stark lighting and long shadows. The only colour allowed to pop is red, used to a tasteful degree. I love how they tackle the piano solo, mixing between piano hammers and more abstract images of the keys. The video combines the gentle humour and tone of Aardman's later work in a style distinct from it. This is one of my favourite songs of all time, and I was introduced to it on the Aardman Selection videotape. I used to constantly rewind it so I could play it again and again and again. Eventually that led to me checking out more of her work down the line. The goal with these animated videos was to gain more attention for these older tunes and artists, and at least in my case with the My Baby Just Cares For Me video, that absolutely worked. Now, if you look on the Wikipedia article for Aardman's filmography, you'll see a film called The Black Dog listed, which I did watch but I won't be covering because I don't think it's an Aardman film. When looking at the film's end credits, I couldn't see Aardman's name, nor the name of anyone associated with Aardman like Sproxton or Lord. I checked everyone listed on the Black Dog's IMDb page to see if there were any links to Aardman, and there were none that I could find. I could be wrong on that. I did wonder if this was a Town Called Panic situation where Aardman handled and distributed the English dub, except the film is British. Looking on Wikipedia, the citation links to a YouTube video containing the film, which includes a credit for Aardman at the very start. But not only does the film have its own end credits that look nothing like these are actually the credits for Babylon. The only difference is the Occam Limited production card. Conclusion, I think this is a mistake. So remember back to 1983 where Channel 4 wanted 10 films, Aardman were only able to produce 5, and 5 more were due later on. Well, now we reach Lip Sync, the final evolution of these animating reality films. This time though, there's a few outliers. Chief among them is Next, which is almost entirely non-verbal and features probably the smoothest animation work yet from the company, and Shakespeare references are plenty. I'd love to outline them all for you, but my copy of the complete works of Shakespeare is currently about there, and at this point can be best described as structurally integral. The other key outlier is Ident, which does feature dialogue, although written in intelligible nonsense rather than English. It's well made and enjoyable, the key theme being the identities and masks we take on as we move through our daily lives, and how they can change and distort our true selves. You can probably guess how the film goes from that sentence alone. It's probably most notable now for the debut of a certain wobbly bobbly dribbly squiggly dog, albeit not quite in the form he'd eventually take in his own series. The remaining films return to animating real voices, but this time take the form of interviews rather than overheard conversations. Of the 3, the most straightforward is Going Equipped, which animates a man's monologue about his criminal past and time in prison. On first glance, there's not much visually drastic going on, with cuts to live action to underline certain points, used better here than in Confessions of a Foyer Girl. However, here they feel free to stage the character moving around the space, and the lighting is very strong. I love that once or twice you see a car's headlights move past the window over the animated character. Really neat stuff. Taking a more humorous tone is War Story, recounting a pensioner's stories about his life during the Second World War. The narrator is rambling, with his stories often folding into each other, giving the animators the opportunity for several fun scene transitions. Despite its lack of focus, the narrator's voice is warm and comforting and perfectly suits the comedic tone taken by the animators. The animators even managed to work in a section where the narrator breaks the story because he's forgotten the details.
Have I got the right house? No. Was that number 5 or number 16?
It's charming, it's funny, it'd be the best thing they've made thus far if it wasn't for Nick Park's contribution.
Sound running when you're ready.
Creature Comforts is the clear standout of Aardman's early work. It introduces elements of Nick Park's signature style, which would soon become the company's signature style, and it boasts superior animation to pretty much anything they've done thus far. It takes the series' gimmick of animating real voices and decides not to limit itself to one voice or conversation. It allows them to really pick the highlights of each interviewee rather than having to gather 5 minutes that can flow together. The individual shots are quite still and static compared to something like Going Equipped, but that focuses attention onto the individual characters, as well as allowing for several background jokes. The real masterstroke of Creature Comforts is its juxtaposition of the authentic concerns of real voices with cartoon animals. Some interviewees were asked about the zoo and animals, while several of the more memorable characters were interviewed about where they live and whether they were satisfied about their living conditions. Whilst other films in this particular niche have used the claymation figures to present uncomfortable or difficult topics, the use of animals in cages to highlight the particular points the interviewees make is both funny and dramatically effective. It may be an obvious connection to make, but it absolutely works. Whilst a film like Babylon may be more striking in and of itself, this concept had legs, hence why it was brought back for several advertisements and its own series years later. It would win Park the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film in 1990, where his key competition was himself, as 1989 was also the year that the first Wallace and Gromit short film was broadcast. After the broadcast of A Grand Day Out, things didn't shift overnight. Aardman still made these odd short films, and they still make film shows and adverts outside of the style they're known for. But with the increasing success of Wallace and Gromit, obviously they began to lean more into that particular style, which ended up elevating them from making shorts for Channel 4 to a key animation player on a global stage. Still, Aardman's early output remains interesting. For every project that aligns with what we would expect from them today, there's another that flies completely in the face of it. Aardman in the 80s shows a company willing to experiment, refining their skill set rapidly to meet the challenges asked of them, and producing material every bit as strong as their later work. If you're interested in checking out anything that we've discussed today, most of it can be found on the Aardman or Boiled YouTube channels. The music videos and Babylon can also be found on YouTube with a quick search. Alternatively, if you can find a copy of Aardman Classics in the wild, that's got pretty much everything on here, bar Sledgehammer and Robert Parker, as well as a wealth of other films that the company have made since. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.